Good morning and welcome to the second episode of Unredacted, the BISI podcast. I'm Abigail Darwish, head of the technology desk at the Bloomsbury Intelligence and Security Institute, BISI, a London-based think tank focused on intelligence, security and policy. My work focuses on cybersecurity and cyber warfare with a particular focus on the impact of emerging technologies and artificial intelligence. Today, we are honored to welcome three incredible experts, Dr. Melanie Garson, Nate Dunning, and David Reed. Bringing together this range of expertise, we'll explore how rapid technological advancements are reshaping security landscapes, from AI to quantum computing, and what this means for defense, resilience, and global policy. Let me introduce our guests, starting with Dr. Melanie Garson. Dr. Garson is an advisor, speaker, and educator specializing in cyber policy, tech geopolitics, and defense innovation. She spent 4 years at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and is also an accredited mediator and former solicitor at Freshfields Brockhouse Derringer. Currently, she teaches her flagship course, From Cyber Warfare to Robots, The Future of Conflict in the Digital Age at University College London, UCL. She also serves as Director of Research and Insights at Istari. Joining us as well are Nathan Dunning and David Reed, co-founders and respectively CEO and CTO of Osprey Security, a cybersecurity startup that specializes in detecting and preventing malware in software supply chains. Nate Dunning brings over a decade of experience in incident response, security operations, and cyber threat intelligence. He began his career in anti-fraud and malware analysis at RSA Security and later held senior roles at Funding Circle and Starling Bank. He is also an industry speaker and mentor, sharing insights on cybersecurity careers and the evolving threat landscape at BrainStation. Before Osprey, David held a range of senior roles in fintech, serving as a senior engineering manager and security architect. His career spans a range of security issues and holds degrees from the University of Cambridge and Georgia Tech. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to have you. So just to start the conversation, I'll be asking a series of questions starting from AI. Now, artificial intelligence is dominating headlines, and it's no surprise. In the cybersecurity space, it's becoming a major force, both as a tool of defense and also offense. As AI tools become more accessible and more powerful, the barriers for entry for cybercriminals and state-sponsored threat actors are rapidly decreasing. So, starting from Melanie and going right. Given this shift, how do you see cyber attacks and threat landscapes evolving with the proliferation and improvement of AI capabilities? And relatedly, where do you think the most critical vulnerabilities lie, and how should organizations be rethinking their defenses in this new era?
Gosh, well, with AI both being a super wicked problem, right? We create the problem that we're trying to solve, and we're using it in trying to solve the problem, which creates a never-ending circle we're trying to break up. The thing with cyber criminals is they are more technologically enabled than sometimes the people that come into the defense, and they're hugely, hugely creative, and they're not afraid of trying things. So that is why we're always going to be sort of chasing the tail of the cyber criminals, because they're in there, they're playing around with it. It's partly game, it's partly professional pride, and they're able to integrate it very quickly as a tool, because AI is fundamentally a tool to help accelerate what you do. So they're able to integrate it very quickly into what they're seeking to do at a faster rate than people who are trying to adopt it they're drawn into the narratives. They're drawn into, you need to be AI enabled, you need to be AI first, you need to try and throw as much AI into whatever you're doing, and without the same mindset of looking for the weaknesses in it. And that's what's sort of constantly creating that cat and mouse game between the cyber criminals. And it's very difficult for organizations, for government entities that are absorbing AI against that pressure of trying to deal with either the commercial pressure of we need to make more faster, to take that step back and think, are we secure enough to integrate this? At the same time that you have all the people that are much more sort of technologically savvy and creative just seeking every which way to use it to get past your defenses.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things to really consider is when AI is enabling us, it's similar to how automation really started to kick in 20, 30 years ago, where there used to be a manual task that took a long time, copying and pasting the same thing, writing it over and over again. Instead, you can use a script or a macro. That was manual workload that was gone because you now have automation. AI is doing the same thing for cognitive workload. So where you had to make a decision over and over again, an AI is now able to sit in that spot and make that decision for you. And defenders only have to, mess up once or twice, maybe 5 times for a serious breach to happen, and attackers can just go crazy. And they can see the whole spectrum of a company's attack surface and a company's visibility, and they can start just poking holes. And with an AI, those cognitive decisions on the perimeter are a whole lot easier to start poking at. There's also, the fundamentals that we've been talking about for 20 or 30 years, things like phishing, are becoming a lot more dangerous because AI is making it easier for attackers to create really convincing phish, not just do the reconnaissance to know that, I used to work in finance, I now work in cybersecurity, I live in London, things like that, or at the snap of a finger where it used to take a little bit of recon and Googling. Now you can just create a profile, ask an AI to go out there and look for a whole bunch of different people, and then create a very logical and very well-spoken phish. And this also is opening up a lot of interesting attacks in markets that didn't used to be targeted as much, such as Asia. Like Japan just had a whole slew of phish that are way better designed than they had been seeing before. And because Japan wasn't as targeted by phishing as a lot of the Western world for the last 20 years, the culture isn't quite ready, and they don't spot the same techniques that a lot of people here in the Western world and in your corporate compliance training, you've been taught how to identify phishing this whole time. Their culture's just not quite there yet.
So yeah, I completely agree that it's just made things a lot easier. Like back in the day, if you're a script kiddie, you'd have to, even if you're using tools that you didn't write, you still have to learn how to use them. You still have to practice with them. Now, with AI tooling, you don't need to do that. You can just get it to teach you really quickly. And you don't need to use off-the-shelf tools. It's a lot easier to write your own tooling, to do vulnerability research, to do exploit dev, even with just off-the-shelf tooling. The other thing is there's lots of new types of attacks that are coming out. So, for example, Nate and I, we care really about the software supply chain, and we're seeing over the last few years there be a surge of attacks in the software supply chain, particularly in open source packages on the internet you just download and use. You just trust them because the ecosystem's already been quite trustworthy. And we've seen, like last year, I think some reports said there's over 500,000 malicious packages hiding out there. And why spend time researching new vulnerabilities, writing an exploit to target people, when you can just ask ChatGPT to write you a open source package that is providing value, put it out there on the internet, wait for people to use it, and then just swap it once you've got 1,000 people using it to say, okay, now download some malware and run at the same time. There's lots of new, easier attacks you can do, and automation is just making it a lot easier.
And just kind of continuing on then, and in terms of transformative technology, we can turn to another, though it's less immediate, but potentially even more disruptive. I'm sure you're all familiar, quantum computing, and also things like quantum AI. Though it's still in its early stages, it does pose serious long-term questions for the foundation of our current digital security systems. So just going around again, what's your perspectives on quantum computing's potential threat to existing encryption standards? And similarly, how might this affect global information security, geopolitical power dynamics, and even the way we define digital trust? Because also in recent months as well, China's been making various breakthroughs with quantum computing and also quantum AI, which ties into broader themes of, say, competition between the US and China. So if you have any thoughts on this, please. Yeah, please, yeah.
Well, first of all, I think, we're again at this push-pull with quantum and the narratives. Some people say it's a lot nearer than we think, and certainly getting post-quantum, encryption and in place is an absolute necessity. I sometimes think the missing point of the discussion is that rather than focusing just on, we've got the quantum development, is what can be done with data that's been stolen once we have Q-Day, once we get that sort of quantum kickoff, because that data, and this is sort of part of the imperative of why we should be sort of doubling down on that, on the data, because once that, Q-Day sort of happens and we have that acceleration in some aspects of quantum computing, what's going to be able to be done with data is going to be remarkable. The kind of knowledge that will be able to be gleaned, and then how that can be activated into even more advanced phishing or even more advanced attacks. That's where the real danger lies. So on one level, you're looking, quantum is going to have multiple applications, whether that's from the military for timing, whether, it's such a sort of, it is going to be another general purpose technology of a different order. But we have to think about, there's thinking about the sort of really big stuff and how we use it, quantum timing, whether it's going to really change the shape of different elements we're able to use in sensing. But there's also the bit of what will it do to break systems that we already have. And then when we get to that sovereign bit of it, it's both, do you have the technology to be able to understand that and counter it? And if we're going to talk offensively, are you going to be able to do that to someone else with all the data that you have technically under sort of responsible cyber? You shouldn't be, but it will reshape to a point what offensive cyber looks like in a quantum age.
So do you think there's anything currently governments or organizations and individuals should be doing to prepare for this? The Q-Day specifically.
Well, certainly, you've got the preparations and the getting, making sure that you've got, NIST and multiple organizations have issued the sort of the regulations or the advisory of how to prepare for it. There's sort of that aspect of it. There's anyway securing data now, which should be done anyway, but with that element, and governments need to be making sure that they have both the policy in place, but also the tech. They're investing in the technology to be able to be competitive.
Yeah, just to build off that, I think it's a really scary concept, Q-Day, as all encryption is going to be gone in an instant. But really, I think if we follow some of the principles that we've already established, we went through a similar revolution when GDPR came out, and everybody had to figure out where their PII was. No, it's on sticky notes, it's in the cloud, it's on wherever, right? And we had to label it all and then correctly manage it all. Some companies were already doing that. Some companies had to scramble. Some companies maybe are still working on it. And I think it's going to be very similar for encryption. So we have these designs of data workflows, right? You go through your organization and where your crown jewels are. Q-Day is going to redefine what some of those critical assets are, what might have been a low value asset because an attacker, if they steal it, can't decrypt it. That will raise in value because it's now decryptable, or it will be in the future. So the asset values are going to change, but as long as we follow established patterns, and this is really where NIST, CISA, NCSC, a lot of these organizations, as they come out and they share these, even if they're just generic templates, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We're all doing it at the same time. Let's share templates and processes. As long as we follow these processes and start planning now, not panicking, but planning for it now, and really working towards having a crypto asset registry of where all of your different crypto is and all that kind of stuff, I think it's manageable.
Optimistic.
I hope so.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's just been said. I guess the biggest worry in my head is, as we just said, about collecting data, and if the big risk of collect now, decrypt later, where organizations or countries are just hoarding all the encrypted data and just waiting until they can decrypt it with a quantum computer is a big worry to me. I mean, if it's a bank containing credit card details that are going to expire in a year, not really a risk. But if that's national secrets, if that's medical data that needs to be kept safe for like decades, then that's a real risk. And that's where I think the priority needs to be placed. And I believe there is lots of talk in government globally around how to handle this risk. So I'm hopeful that the right people are looking at this problem.
One of the points there, I think notices of erasure and confirmation of erasure are going to become 10x more important, because if you just have, I can't imagine any third-party managed service providers would do this, but if you do have data from former customers or clients around and you're compromised, now their data is also compromised. And that was bad before, but it's about to become much worse. So I think having it in your vendor offboarding, or your data erasure process that you actually request and get certifications that say this vendor has actually got rid of the data, you know, like you can always secure your house. It's other people's houses where your data sits elsewhere that's also going to be a problem.
Can I just add in? And it goes back to, and it is, I mean, quantum has the potential. We already talk about how AI has huge potential to solve some of our most challenging problems. And, you know, the hope is for quantum that the problems that AI is not able to solve, the sort of quantum AI will be able to solve. But again, it goes back to relying on the data that's in there. And that is some of the most sensitive data, like sort of the genetic data, and but as easily as that can be used. So if you take a situation like 23andMe that suffered a hack and that, you know, and data was stolen, now that data's been moved as part of bankruptcy sale or whatever, it's sort of extraordinarily complex situation, that kind of data is part of the national security of the nation, and it is like potentially, you know, at risk actually even from a sort of AI-enabled process, let alone a quantum one. And so the question is really securing down and doubling down on that data more widely that could be potentially misused for quite nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
Okay, so going on, I guess, from what governments could be doing, if we move on to tech companies, as technology companies continue to grow in scale, influence, and strategic importance, public-private partnerships in national and global security are becoming not just common, but unavoidable. From satellite networks to AI infrastructure, governments increasingly rely on private sector innovation and, in some cases, on the decisions of individual tech leaders. While public scrutiny often focuses on concerns about government overreach, less attention is paid to the risks posed by dependencies on powerful private actors such as Elon Musk, whose interests, incentives, and ethical standards may not always align with those of democratic institutions. So how do you assess the dependencies of public-private partnerships and security risks in the context of tech advancements? And again, for example, Elon Musk being powerful was also controversial. And of course, yes. Yeah.
Well, I know you got onto my pet favorite subject. So the problem is, look, the companies, and it's not just Musk, it's what we've got is with many of the large tech companies, is how they've expanded and proliferated through every element of the stack. So they're extraordinarily powerful, whether they're platforms, even if you take not just Musk, you've got Amazon, you've got Google, whether they own subsea cables, whether they're also on the platform level, whether they're also owned of data centers, whether they're now investing in the energy infrastructure for those data centers, and they're in the satellite. So fundamentally, they're almost autonomous in themselves, but also because of, and if we go to a situation like Starlink, which has been first past the post and is even a bigger player in the satellite space than the government, which I mean, it was over 3,500 satellites in what is actually not an infinite space, even though it is space. And therefore, if you know, anything happens, we take the UK, we are an island, we are reliant on our subsea cable network. If anything goes wrong with that, our backup is basically Elon Musk. So in effect, that we've sort of privatized our national security. Our ultimate backup is in the hands of one quixotic individual. Now, that is not necessarily very secure national security on a macro level, particularly when we've seen recently like what happened in Ukraine when the US did a pullback and said they weren't providing intelligence. And it's been stated that and Musk has said this, Starlink has said this, that we can't necessarily guarantee that we can provide service if the US says we can't. So that's where, to me, the real danger point is for governments really have to assess what is their resilience. And that's not just to, you know, malicious cable outages go out because of underwater earthquakes, or all sorts of action could be taken. What is the picture of their national resilience and how diversified is that among the private sector actors that they might be relying on? And where did the potential if you want, single points of failure in that relationship, because that is the greatest concern from my perspective. I can talk about this more.
I think also if you have single points of failure, single actors that are in control of an entire segment, like satellites or undersea cables or something like that, and that's a private person, they're able to hold an incredible amount of influence in other areas of like the government doling out money, right? So let's say Elon wanted to get into cyber and he created ElonSec, right? Would the US government, UK government, Ukrainian government be encouraged to fund ElonSec because they have to in order to maintain their satellites? That's an incredibly scary thing. Not just because of the power given to that person, but also because the withering of innovation itself. That means the people that might have a better idea, a startup or a company that's trying to break into a new sector and get into that cybersecurity or whatever that allocation of funds would be, aren't able to because of outside influences that have nothing to do with the merit or the value of that idea.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with the worries around concentration risk and critical third parties. The Cybersecurity Resiliency Act that just came out in the UK is basically trying to solve this problem. In the US, you've had lots of executive orders and discussions around this. I think one of the last executive orders from President Biden was on open source and supply chain security, and that's one of the few executive orders that Trump didn't rescind. And after that, you've had a number of memos in the DoD talking about this as well. So it's definitely on the radar and people are talking about it. But yes, we have more partnerships between the public and private sector, which can be, is a good thing in my opinion. The private sector becomes more of a target, and that's could be a target where if there's an outage, then suddenly not just one organization, but tons of organizations across the US and the UK are impacted, but it also means they're targeted for their data and their access. For example, there's a advanced persistent threat that is believed to be China that targeted Microsoft, and once they got access, they managed to get access to, I think it was like 25 different agencies, including in the US government and private companies. So it makes the private sector much more appealing to target as well, and then that needs to be taken into account when you make those partnerships.
So we've covered some very weighty topics, from the offensive use of AI to quantum disruption to the increasingly blurred lines between public and private power in cybersecurity. So looking ahead, what gives you hope, or alternatively, what keeps you up at night when you think about the future of cybersecurity over the next 5 to 10 years?
You want to start with me? Gosh, well, a lot keeps me up at night. And to me, it is that this picture of how risks are converging. It's the blurring of lines between all the different parts of the stack and how. So a good example is how you raised it before. It's like, at one point we had disinformation as part of a lot of operating concepts within conflict. Now we have the potential to accelerate that through AI. I mean, and if we look at the pace of which that's happening, so if we take, there was a report that came out recently, Russia has an organization called their Social Design Agency. And their Social Design Agency has a budget of about 600 million euros a year. And they are fundamentally sort of sharing information across the world of various sorts. Now, between 2023 and 2024, the sort of reach of some of this information had over 10 billion touch points. And that is part of the acceleration effect that we have with AI. So it's at this convergence of technologies, and also, for me, the reliance on, as we increasingly become reliant on, say, satellite data for actual quite critical infrastructure, for things like farming, if we're going to move into agri-tech, and sort of really thinking about how we, and this is like right in your ballpark of like, what does that supply chain look like, and how are we making sure that that's resilient in places that don't appear at first to be key points of national security, but do affect human security quite acutely. What hope do I have that, as I said, I started with the very tool that we're worried about is a tool that we can enable to help us, and just making sure that we do that right.
Yeah, I think my biggest concerns are around the risks that we kind of mime actions around. Data classification is something that a lot of organizations have struggled with for a long time. With the proliferation of AI at everybody's fingertips, we're dumping data in there in an exponential way. And we don't know what happens when a model or a company gets breached and it has all of the financial and personal data of a country because everybody uses 2, 3, 5 AI companies. So I think there's major privacy concerns around there, and some companies are doing some incredible work, which is fantastic and should be called out. But a lot of companies are kind of moving the needle far enough so it's not a high risk or a critical risk and calling it good enough and letting it sit there because it's mostly kind of sort of done. And that's really concerning. My hopes are really stemming around the people, because I think in the last 5 years, cybersecurity went from having this gap of employees, like this hiring gap, to, depending on who you listen to, it's kind of filled, because the job market's really difficult right now. It's hard to find a job because there's so many candidates out there, so many at the junior, mid, and senior level. And I think that the people that are coming in now bring an incredible diversity of thought. The education systems are getting better around our cybersecurity infrastructure. 15 years ago, there weren't any, to my knowledge, cybersecurity bachelor's or master's degrees. Now we're starting to formalize that and structure that into a way so we can churn out like eager, young, budding professionals at scale. And honestly, the startup community, I mean, of course I'm going to talk startups, but the startup communities are incredibly collaborative. And that's a fantastic group of people to really get in there with. If you have some time, there's some incredible hackathons where you can make real impact in health tech, in defense tech, in agri-tech. I don't know of a hackathon that helps secure tractors or drones or anything like that for ag tech, but that'd be awesome. I should know about that coming from farm country, but maybe I'll look into that. But I think the people at the core of it are really trying to solve the big problems. And if we can find ways to collaborate, information share, and enable them, I think we have a chance.
So I'll start with what I'm excited about, and then where I think what my concerns are. So, as we said earlier, the bar to entry is much lower now for people that want to become hackers and want to produce sophisticated attacks. The bar to entry has also got a lot lower for people who want to do cybersecurity on the defensive side. Like, if you're an engineer 5 years ago, you weren't really expected to understand cybersecurity as part of your job, and more that expectation is coming, and AI tooling is making that easier. So if you are an engineer who has a security problem in your day job, you can now solve it without having to go off and find an expert, and that's a great thing. Also, automation around security operations has exploded, which is awesome. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the security operations center space, like network operations, security operations that's just completely automated. So when someone hacks you, your analyst doesn't have to look through huge amounts of alerts, then spend ages digging through the data. They just get an AI that goes, I've spotted something, here's everything I think you need to care about, and they can respond quickly and easily, which is going to make defense a lot better. Also, with the rise of vibe coding, quite selfishly, this means there's going to be a lot of code out there with bugs, which means I think that security jobs are going to be around for a long time. We talk around the fact that development might be automated out of existence, which I personally don't think is going to happen, but the more and more people rely on AI to do development, the more and more security issues they're going to have, and the more they're going to need people like myself. So I'm very happy about that. Things I'm worried about, I'd say, I had something, I forgot it now, damn it. The main thing I think I'm worried about is data sovereignty with AI. That I say I don't want to use AI because I'm worried about protecting my data, or a company goes, our data is too sensitive to put into an AI, so we're going to avoid using AI. Well, there's the whole issue around productivity and quality of life of not being able to use the latest tools. But just because the company I'm in doesn't use AI doesn't mean that any of the vendors or companies we partner with don't use AI, and you might not have any visibility on what they're doing with your data. And so they might then just take your data, which they're meant to be processing and protecting, and throw that into an AI, and you have no visibility of that. So I'm worried about issues like that, because at the moment, A large number of the AI companies are based in the US. We've obviously got Mistral in Europe as well, got DeepSeek in China. But you need to be thinking, or we need to be thinking about what happens to not just our data, but our information as it goes into AIs in other areas of the world. I mean, GDPR is all about tracking your data, but if your data goes into a model and that model is used elsewhere, there's no tracking of your GDP in that at the moment. And if you did try to demand that, that's such a heavy restriction that's going to impact the development of AI. So we're going to have to balance that productivity and risk. And I think we're going to end up in a situation where a lot of our information ends up being absorbed into AI models without our knowledge or understanding of what the impact is.
Thank you. Before I conclude, is there anything else that you guys would like to elaborate on any other parts?
I really love some of the developments in the security operations space. The enablement of AI to be like the senior analyst over your shoulder is incredible. I mean, when I was working overnight shifts from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. or whatever, and there's 2 of us in the office, one of us gets an alert, and there's 4 bleary eyes looking at this alert, trying to cross-correlate it across 6 years of data, that's a task. Having an AI that doesn't drink coffee and is able to just be quick and succinct and there for you, I think it's going to be a massive boon for a lot of the up-and-coming security analysts.
But on the same token, I mean, I was involved in a conversation about this over, in fact, just yesterday. We're talking about, but there is a question on, and this is sort of in this future of work, a question across a number of fields of how do you train the experts? So this is a lot without having done that sort of at the coal face bit, or being able, and that bias also, because, and this is across all areas, and I think this is another sort of area possibly of concern in this, that there is, as we develop a bias against questioning the machine, or in that human-machine teaming relationship, how do we create the confidence or create that sort of critical skills awareness to know when to question the machine? At the same time, how would you ever, there's that train the expert without being, and this is the dilemma.
Definitely.
Are we going to have, are we going to do simulated training environments where they have to go through being the expert, or do you'd have to do X amount of hours with no AI to be able to learn how to use the AI well? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was going through university for computer science, they made us take our exams with pencil and paper. And this is like well into all kinds of tab completion, all that kind of stuff. But the formatting was so important that if you don't get the foundational level right, you're never going to succeed in the long term. So I completely agree. And probably without a lot of those overnight shifts, I wouldn't be the security professional that I am today, because that's where I had to read French trademark law one night because of a brand abuse case. And I sat there and we had a tablet and I was just scrolling through trademark law for 4 hours. That's something that sticks with you. If you just ask an AI, you're not going to get that value. So you're absolutely right. It's pretty much a game of chutes and ladders, right? It will enable you in the places that you need it to. But if you don't do the hard work, and if you're not putting in the hours to actually go through the fundamentals, whether it's log analysis or reverse engineering of malware, any of that, the actual core fundamentals of security defense, you're not going to internalize those skills. And what you're going to become is a prompt security analyst rather than an actual security analyst. So you're just good at asking the AI for the security brain that you should have.
Yeah, I think it's really about partnerships, not replacement. Companies that just replace large numbers of their employees with AI might work for a little while, but it will blow up and they'll go, why is the AI not working? And the answer will be, we don't know. If you need to do partnerships with people that can understand what's going on, they can understand their tools and how they're working. So if there are issues, they can diagnose those problems, because we're not getting into a situation, at least in the immediate term, where those issues are fixed for us. And I'm a bit of a pessimist on how far AI development's going to go. So we're already starting to see it slow down. The saying I've always used is the tools are only as good as the user, and the user is only as good as the tools. So if we just give people an AI and say enter prompts, they're not going to get good answers. If you have people with no cool AI tooling at all, they're not going to be as good either. So we need to partner and make sure that we balance it out. That's my view.
Absolutely. And if you don't find a balance, right, and if we are just constantly giving answers given to us by AI, whether it's in job interviews or whether it's in any aspect of life, there is going to be this weird conflux of lack of imagination. because everybody's imagination is going to be what ChatGPT tells us.
Or dependent on it.
Exactly, yeah. And so spending the hard time and actually having that creative thinking or creative writing, maybe that's how schools adjust a little bit, and they don't do some of the basic technology courses because everybody will know how to type, but maybe they go deeper into the things that AI really struggles with, like creative writing or problem solving or things like that.
I think, yeah, being a good problem solver is the main thing.
Yeah.
The number of engineers you see who they just want to be given a ticket, they want to go off and solve the problem, close the ticket, move on to the next ticket. They don't want to talk to people. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to have to use soft skills. They just want to be given a technical task and then complete it and move on. That job's gone. AI is going. That's the bit that AI excels at. What AI doesn't excel at is the engagement, the bigger picture thinking around it. That sort of stuff is still going to be around, and so it just means that we're going to expect more out of the people we have. And I think, although there's going to be an issue of like younger grads now. I definitely feel sorry for grads coming out of university right now, because it's going to be a very big jump for them to try and get to the expert point without the same like learning path that we've had.
Yeah, I think I agree with that in some contexts where I've been in the room, and particularly with sort of VCs, entrepreneurs, perhaps young engineers. This has particularly been in certain sort of tech spaces. They're always saying like, well, what is it you want us to, pitch to you? And I sort of took issue with the particular sort of person who was giving the talk, and they said, oh, just bring us your best ideas. And now my answer to that would have been, actually go and speak to the end user that uses this kind of technology and find out what's not working. I think sometimes that's also, it goes to this gap of the reliance of let's ask ChatGPT about it, rather than actually who's the end user of this actual product, that sort of baseline, and, going into the field and talking to them and understanding the actual operating environment that they're in before you go and do that.
Yeah, ChatGPT is not the end user.
Yeah.
Thank you guys all for your insights. I wonder if you have any questions for each other, especially since you're from different backgrounds, if you'd like to ask each other some questions.
I actually have a question for you, Melanie.
Okay.
So,
what would you like to know?
So kind of similar to the previous topic on how SOC analysts are going to be using AI, I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on how AI can be used in policy development. Legalese is a different language in general, and I think policy is pretty close to that. So do you think it should be heavily used to help write? Do you think it should be used in the research phase? Like, where do you think the balance is of using using AI when actually drafting policies?
I think that's a great question. I think there's two aspects to that. I think there's ways that it could be used really well as part of, if you want, just knowledge management within, government. Unfortunately, what happens with a lot of policy conversations over the years, things get written, briefs get put aside. Using that for central repository to actually be able to ask the questions of what's been tried, what's been rejected, what's been, things like that could, if used well, really speed up the process. And then you could sort of actually be able to filter out old ideas, new ideas, sometimes rejected ideas that need to come back to the fore. A lot of the times that moves on with people. And so the question is that capture point. How do you capture that sort of, if you want intelligence, that sort of knowledge management that sits? So if you take the US case right now, where so many people have left their jobs, a massive amount of internal knowledge of processes and, policy and policy development that will have been lost, and particularly because people left very, very quickly because they were worried that if they got fired, they'd lose their retirement, so people resigned super quickly, that the amount of internal knowledge of the entire systems that we lost would never be captured. So I think there's uses of AI within that to be able to ask questions, to be able to have that cross-functionally, because a lot of time government being super siloed, of sort of not knowing, as the Department of Education does. If you just even think about cyber, right? If you think about every single department that's written its own version of different bits of the cyber regulations, sort of even with the CAPS and the NCSC guidance and everything else, everybody's doing something a little bit different. Whereas if they were all in a central space, you'd actually be able to quickly ask a question and kind of join the dots. I think that would be a really useful application of how you can write it, how you can feedback and bring out clauses to speed up the writing of different bits of, let's say, legislation that can draw across different elements. I think it can be used really well for that, but it will still need that human oversight, that human in the loop sometimes, because we've all read like ChatGPT stuff that just or any kind of doesn't make sense. It just literally doesn't make sense. Sadly, I've read student essays like that. I know in a minute, because it just is something syntactically. You read it and you read it again, you read it again, you're like, it has made no sense. And I do believe that the humans I've taught are better than that. So I think that's the bit in it. But I do think it does have great applications for joining up that knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful. One of the things I've battled against in former career lives was when tacit knowledge leaves an org, right? One of the most important things for me in security and engineering in particular is like documentation, and document your stuff really well. You might be the best programmer, best investigator or responder ever, but if you don't document it really well, you leave. The company's now in the lurch because that tacit knowledge is gone. I can only imagine the magnitude of scale that must be true for government with the turnover in like public representatives and also their staff and everybody. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I would like to go into some of the supply chain risks.
Sure.
I don't think we've talked about enough. Well, I mean, and 2 points. Certainly from a UK perspective, we've now seen a whole bunch of policy stuff come out on supply chain risks that probably could do with some AI help to just sort of analyze where are you feeling that, the UK is are they going in the right direction with the supply chain risk? We've got also the Cybersecurity and Resilience Act that we don't know what's going to be in there yet. So what would you like to see in it that you're not seeing coming out of the policy conversation so far?
Shall I answer?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, we have a big bias because we really care about the security issues in open source. And I definitely feel that gets neglected because what happens is we talk about vulnerabilities or risks in software. And the reality is that most companies will go, okay, well, I will get this tool that ticks off vulnerabilities and risks in software done. The reality is that lots of security tools that deal with looking for vulnerabilities don't deal with hunting for malware in open source code or malware in proprietary code. And that's not something you can just have like an antivirus or a software to fix it. You need specialist tooling to be able to address that, or specialist researchers to be able to address that. And some of the biggest attacks we've seen in the last few years, like SolarWinds, that sort of attack, all the traditional cybersecurity tools out there aren't going to address that. They all would just let it through. You could do everything right and still get hit. So I think I annoyed Ollie Whitehouse, the CTO of NCSC, on LinkedIn the other day because he posted a very good article that was released by DCIT, talking about how to protect your software supply chain, and I pointed out that it completely missed this.
I also think there's an educational point of view, and maybe the Resiliency Act will help with this, maybe not, but the misunderstanding between a vulnerability and malware. It's one thing to have a car with a misconfiguration, a seatbelt that doesn't work. And it's a completely different thing to have a seatbelt that's been actively sabotaged. With a vulnerability, an attacker needs to gain access to it, be able to exploit it, and then be able to maybe exfiltrate or have the impact of that exploitation. With malware, it is the exploitation. There is no accessibility issue. Its existence is the accessibility. So there's a little bit of an industry education piece that hopefully some of the upcoming legislation or collaboration with NCSC will be talking about. I agree. There's some places that the documentation could expand on it a little bit more. Yeah.
Could I just follow up on that?
Please.
Sorry.
No.
Right. So what do you then see the future is for open source? And in this picture,
That's a fascinating one. So also keep it on track with what we're talking about. Most of the risks we're talking about that are developing here in the software supply chain are because they're getting worse because of AI. AI makes it a lot easier to do these sort of attacks. But the future is a tricky one. So at the moment, if it gets worse, the worse it gets, the less people are going to trust open source. And open source is really, really important. The fact that you can just say, I'm an engineer and I want to download that package from there, that package from there, that package from there, write 5 loads of code, and I've made something completely new. That's great. And AI tooling like ChatGPT can do this for you as well now, really, really easily. So loss of trust in open source is going to have huge ramifications to just general productivity. You're going to have the choice of going, I can build a product that works really quickly so I can beat my competitors, but then I'm taking huge risks to my security, and I can't pick one or the other. The Department of Defense, they had released a memo the other day actively attacking and let me rephrase that, speaking quite negatively about open source and even suggesting the Department of Defense moving away from depending on open source. And that would be quite big. I think that would have big knock-on effects to the productivity of the Department of Defense. And also it will mean that the US government is less invested in helping keep open source safe and secure, which is, US government has done lots of really good work in the past on helping build that trust in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I think my big worry is that loss of trust.
And there could be the development velocity is what everybody cares about right now, especially with vibe coding, because you can build 10 times faster, but it's going to be sloppier. Just like with everything else, if you go faster, the quality of work is going to wane. So AI coding agents and ChatGPT, help me debug this, all this kind of stuff. There are going to be hallucinations. It's going to bake in some fundamental issues with the open source supply chain. What this could lead to is like a verified package open source, but then who does that? Do we rely on a mega corporation like a Google or a Microsoft, and then we go back to the conversation we had where a few people are making decisions over basically public assets? Because the person who actually maintains the package could be someone in Taipei or someone in Iowa or an organization, but now it's being verified by a separate corporate entity or a government institute, and they're never going to be able to deal with the sprawl. Open source growth is massive. There's some incredible GitHub research on there that just shows the exponential upon exponential growth of open source to the point where now almost every single corporate application is 95, 97% open source. If you're saying we're against open source, okay, you now have to rebuild 95% of your application. No profit-seeking entity is going to be able to do that.
But do you think there's applications like in defense where, I saw an initiative from, I think it was from Sherry, that's like they were saying, well, if we want innovation within defense, that has to be in effect in some sort of, the building blocks have to be in some sort of verified closed, I call it closed open source, or you might call it verified open source, that for certain applications you do have to have some level of assurance that the building blocks in themselves to as much as possible as we would ever, there's never going to be a complete certainty, but we have that kind of, if you want, closed sandbox, particularly for certain applications.
So that exists to an extent. There are entities and companies that have a complete firewall and they review every package before it comes through. But the amount of manual and process effort that goes into that is extraordinarily expensive. So there needs to be a middle ground, because there's only defense, especially certain parts of defense, I'm sure do that very well. And they have that nailed, because if there was a foreign adversary, and a lot of the people who are attacking the open source supply chain right now are nation states, because it's easy and there's a lot of money there, especially in crypto wallets. So if you are a nation state and you're attacking that, the defense sector has to have their eye on it. So I'm sure they have a nice little moat around their application, but that stymies a lot of their innovation.
Yeah.
And So you need to be able to take that next step forward and be able to accelerate that a little bit, get it a little bit closer to real time, so you don't send off the package name and Steve or Susan and the review team gets back to you in 2 weeks. I haven't been an engineer in a professional sense in a long time, but if I'm writing code and I have to request a package and stop what I'm doing there, and then 2 weeks later try and pick that back up, I will have no idea what I was doing, why I was doing it. So yeah, I think there's a middle ground that we have to find.
And so that's going to be the key thing into how we accelerate defense. One of the things I'm working on at the moment would like how to get more SMEs, how to get more entrepreneurship into defense. But yet we have to sort of worry about the vulnerabilities in open source that would sort of help the speed of which you want to do it.
Yeah, we were at the London Defence Tech Hackathon a couple of weeks ago, and lots of really amazing people there working on lots of really, really cool problems. And a number of AI companies there as well, and all of it, 100% of it, was relying on open source. And they are going to be hopefully going out there and providing real-world, tangible products. Trying to take that and then go, right, now let's recreate this without the risk of open source isn't going to work.
I just want to say thank you guys all for being here, and thank you for all your insights. And if you are interested in their work and want to know more, all of their details will be linked in the description below. Thank you for watching.